Hi, this is Tim Hamilton, the co-host of the Maryland Crabs, and I'm here with a crab cake for your listening pleasure. What's a crab cake? Well, it's not quite a full episode, it's just a little snippet. Stay tuned and check it out. Make sure you check us out on themarylandcrabs.com. You can follow us on Twitter at MD Crabs Podcast or find us on Facebook at the Maryland Crabs Podcast. Don't forget, subscribe, rate us, iTunes. Go there now. Hey, Sarah, it's Tim Hamilton. How are you doing today?
Oh, good. Hi. Sorry, I just saw your. I think my cell phone sound is turned off.
You wouldn't even be the first one to duck my call today, so I wasn't hurt.
Oh, no, I'm not ducking. I'm not ducking. I just called you back.
Well, thanks for joining us. I know you're going to be coming down to Annapolis this weekend, this Friday, right?
Yeah, Friday.
All right, so for people who don't know, Sarah Koenig, she is the host and co-creator of Serial, which was the groundbreaking podcast, 5 years ago, wasn't it? 2014?
2014 we launched, yep.
I felt like it was just yesterday, and that kind of launched the whole podcast phenomenon, really. I mean, it was there, but I mean, that was the big one. And she will be at Maryland Hall in partnership with St. Anne's School of Annapolis to talk about Serial and other things, storytelling and journalism and new media. So, well, you're actually in State College, aren't you? So you're kind of out of the mainstream.
Mainstream of what?
Like the East Coast, the whole coastal sort of elite.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I live in the middle of Pennsylvania. That's right.
I lived out there. I went to school out there for 4 years and then a couple years in Johnstown, which was picturesque. It was beautiful.
Oh, did you go to Penn State?
No, I went to St. Francis College. So we were like your super little brother over in the mountains way up there. So.
Oh, okay.
It was near Altoona. You just kind of go straight up. It's the Yins Belt. You started your career, actually, I didn't know that you were actually a reporter at the Baltimore Sun.
I was a reporter at the Baltimore Sun, yeah. I mean, I didn't start my career there, but I was there from 2000, I think I got there. And then I stayed for a few years, like 2.5 years, maybe 3 years almost.
But so you started off in print because you were also in Moscow, going from Moscow to Baltimore. That's a switch.
That's right, yeah. I actually went from Moscow to New Hampshire for a few years first. I was at the Concord Monitor, so the climate was a little more similar to Moscow. and then from Concord, New Hampshire, I came to Baltimore. And
that's of course where Serial got its start. Was Adnan was a student. For everyone who doesn't know, and if you don't, you shouldn't be listening to this. Sarah investigated the case of Adnan Syed, who was accused and convicted of killing his girlfriend in high school in 1999, and the Serial podcast explored all the evidence through interviews and with the people involved to kind of open up the question to say, was he railroaded? Was he rightfully convicted? And there was never a answer to that. And it's probably the biggest question you're asked is, do you believe he's guilty or not? And I'm not going to be that lazy. But what it really did was it kicked off a phenomenon of podcasting, which to that point had been kind of niche. And that was the first 1 million download podcast, I think, if I'm correct. And it won the Peabody Award in 2015. And it really just kicked off that whole true crime genre of podcasting. Did it take you by surprise when it just took off the way it did?
Yeah, I mean, yes. We had no idea. I didn't know anything about podcasting. Like I don't think Julie Snyder, my partner, did either, really. So, she knew more than I did.
So why'd you decide on the medium? That's
because it seemed we were trying to make a new radio show. We both were, producers at the radio show This American Life, and which is a public, which runs on public radio stations. So we had both worked at a radio show for a really long time, and Julie even much longer than I had. But at that point, we'd worked together for 10 years already, and so we were trying to make a new radio show, and then I remember just after a while. We were still figuring out what we were doing, whatever. And at one point, Julie just said, I think we should do this as a podcast. And I was like, what? Why?
A what cast?
Yeah, honestly, a little bit. I mean, I barely knew, what that meant. And she was like, well, it's just a lot cheaper. We don't have to sell it to anybody, and it's cheaper to do. And then it can be any length we want, and it can be whatever we want. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't care. So that was about as much thought on my side went into it. I was like, I just want to do the story. And so I don't really care how it gets done. And I remember actually Ira Glass, who was our boss at that point at This American Life, I was talking to him for something, and he was like, so it's going to be a podcast. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, well, are you worried about that? Or something like that. And I said, no, why would I be worried? And he said, well, don't you want people to hear it? And I was like, oh, I mean, I guess, yeah, sure.
It would help.
Because the implication was like, nobody listens to podcasts. Like, there's no, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I actually liked the idea of it being a podcast because it felt like a lot less pressure because people didn't listen to podcasts. So I was like, if it's bad, no one's really going to know.
But then it exploded and you were like, yes, Jesus Christ. That's because I could sense that where, I mean, I remember it came out every Thursday. And I've listened to it seriously like 5 times, like the entire series. Yeah, I don't have a life.
God, you've heard it more than I have.
But it was amazing to me because it wasn't just the content, which of course was riveting. But I've been listening to podcasts for a long time, so to me it was fascinating because it was the first one to go mainstream where I heard my mother talking about it, and she was waiting every week, and I could hear in your voice just it almost seemed like it evolved as it went. Because you had it was such a cultural phenomenon at the time that it had to be overwhelming. So I could almost sense that as you were going, that you realized that it was becoming a big thing rather than after the fact while it was happening. Yeah,
it was. I mean, I think that I was slow to understand it, that what was happening basically that it was becoming pop culture. And I was slow to understand that, slower than other people on staff to understand it. I think, so yeah, especially toward the end where it felt like almost a frenzy was underway. And I was just like, I'm just trying to finish this story. Like literally we were not even week 2. I mean, we were like day to day by the end. We were really white knuckling it at the end. I mean, we knew. And to be clear, like I think a lot of people just thought like we just started and we had no idea what the story was or what we were doing. That is not true at all. Like I had been reporting the story for more than a year by the time we launched. So like clearly we knew the contours of the whole thing, but we hadn't made the actual episodes. And so by the end it was really like, we finished the very final episode that same morning that it aired. So we finished at like 1 a.m. and I think we aired it at, 5 or 6 a.m. So, I mean, it was pretty crazy, but so that was an issue, but also it was just like none of us had ever made a serialized long form audio documentary before too. So it was just figuring out how to be as a narrator and how to kind of carry a story for that long over time. I mean, it was 12 episodes, which is a lot. Was it 12?
Yep.
Yeah, I think it was 12. So yeah, it's a lot. I mean, the ones I've done subsequent to that, the last one season 3, which we just finished, was 9 episodes. And that was also an insane amount of work. But like now thinking back, I'm like, wow, I did 12 of those. I can't believe I did 12 of those. So it was also just the thing. It's sort of, I guess what I'm saying, setting aside the response to it, the project itself was a huge new thing for us to figure out.
Going back,
so that's probably what you were hearing. That panic was like,
well, it wasn't panic.
Twofold.
It wasn't panic. It was just that you could feel you developing a voice throughout the time. It almost became like film noir at one point. When I especially think about when you're talking about when you're going to the woods where someone went off to relieve themselves. They're 100 feet off the road, and it was that musing that you had that was very film noir. Which you don't usually see in this style, and that has been adopted so far that you see that a lot in, of course, the subsequent productions like Shittown, which is another amazing production. And you can even hear that now in the Slow Burn series that's produced by Slate. But it was listening to you kind of develop a voice. And that was the sense people had, because I think it was every week until 6 episodes in, and then it went every 2 weeks. And everyone had that sense that, okay, here's this week's episode, and now Sarah and Julie are off investigating this week. And this is this week's investigation that they're going to pull together. And it just, we could hear the voice developing, because there had never been anything to that point. I mean, this was groundbreaking, not just because it was the birth of, it was the explosion of podcasting as a genre, and it was the birth of the true crime podcast, but also how do you stylize that? How do you present that story? And it was just interesting that was what you chose as the storytelling technique and device, and that is what is stuck. That narration interspersed with the interviews, and you hear that all the time now, but that was so groundbreaking at the time.
Yeah, it's funny where. I feel like, well, the every 2 weeks I think we did in season 2, not in season 1.
Oh, was that
season 1 was every
Bo
season 2 about Bo Bergdahl was every week for a while, and then it went every 2 weeks for the last. But anyway, just regardless, I feel like sometimes I've seen people writing about Serial more recently, like I would say in the past, I don't know, year or two, and they'll sort of refer to something as, they won't say the word hacky, but it's like that's what they're getting at, is it feel like the style feels a little cliche or tired. And I want to be like, but we invented
were there
that.
First.
No, we're not.
And I disagree too.
And so I'm like, no, I get it. It feels very inevitable now, all of these kind of storytelling moves, or the tone, or even just theme music. I mean, Julie was the first person to kind of invent theme music for a podcast like that in the way that we had it, or the previously on thing where you're like, previously on Serial or coming up on, like, she took all of these tricks from TV and applied them to the podcast, and that was her vision entirely. And now it's standard. Like, that's how those podcasts sound. And I'm always like, yep, Julie invented that.
Yeah, but I mean, when people, and I haven't seen any of those either, because I mean, Serial is just one of those masterpieces. I mean, there's several of them that you would hold up in the pantheon of podcasts that all the podcasts kind of derive from that now. And now they're kind of mainstream. And by mainstream, I mean, baby boomers listen to them. My mom listens to them. You kind of came out the gate. There was all this kind of rudimentary podcasts all around you. I mean, there's some really good ones. I mean, Dan Carlin, I'm a big fan, and he's got a strong niche, but you kind of came out swinging with I mean, kind of a perfect series. It was 12 perfect episodes, and that's got to put a lot of pressure on you.
Oh, well, that's kind of you to say. I'm not sure they're 12 perfect episodes, but I think the thing that we were doing that was different, right? Where, again, Julie and I had worked at the radio show This American Life for a long time already. We're good at our jobs. We know how to make audio stories, and we knew how to do it at a pretty high level. And I think the thing that we brought to it is we were saying, I don't see why there's any reason we can't bring all of sort of the rigor of the reporting that I would be doing on This American Life and just do it in podcast form. And somehow that had not happened yet. Like, people just weren't doing real reporting, and certainly not anything investigative on podcasts yet. So it wasn't like, so we brought all the things that I would normally do for This American Life hour-long radio story. We just moved it onto the podcast, and that was new.
So you had set some, I don't want to say limitations, but you set some parameters to what you were used to, which was the radio show, saying, well, this is how we do it. So even like the time limitations.
Well, we didn't know another way to do it. Like, that's the only audio reporting I've ever done in my life is for This American. So it's not like we had some other vision and we were like, no, we're going to do that. It was just like, we're just going to do our jobs the way we do it. It's just that instead of it being released on the radio, it's going to be on the internet. Like, that was really literally the only difference. And the pleasure too of this can be any length it needs to be was huge and very freeing. But yeah, in terms of just like it sounding polished, I think it just sounded the way that we would have made it for the radio.
Right. You had the standards.
That was our job,
Now, all the programming that you did for This American Life, did you become as, I want to say, emotionally invested? I mean, I'm thinking with the interviews that you did with Adnan is because you were doing the interviews, you were interpreting the interviews, and then you were producing the show. And it seemed like you had an emotional investment. And I'm sure that's the way it is in a lot of investigative journalism, because you spend so much of your time and so much of your gray matter on it. But you find it difficult to be objective in that case? Because I mean, I think you did. We heard in your voice the same thing that we all thought is one week you're like, all right, he did it. And next week you're like, no, I'm not so sure. And you go back and forth and you never come to a solid conclusion. But I think it's more difficult for you because we only heard, an hour or so a week, whereas you were immersed in interviews with him and I guess, probably hours long phone calls. And it's very difficult to extract yourself from the emotional connection that comes with a guy who frankly is very charming and engaging.
Yeah, no, I think that's always a challenge when you're working on a story for a long time and you're talking to one person for a long time over time. I mean, I probably talked to Adnan like way more than I talked to anybody else in my life during that period. And the same is true for a couple of people in the series, we just finished season 3, where I'm still in touch with a person from that series, like, he calls me every single day. So yeah, it is that's a very, very real thing. And, in Adnan's case, it was my duty as a reporter, right? I feel like was to just be honest and fair about everything I knew and as truthful as I could be in terms of like what facts I could marshal, but also being super mindful. Like I have feelings and I have bias. I mean, all of us, right, are bringing bias to every single thing we do, every interaction we have, and just knowing that it's there and tracking it and keeping track of it and making sure it's not pushing me to a conclusion or to even questions of tone, right? Or the way that what words I use when I'm describing things, like all of that we were monitoring closely, not only in that story, but in every story we do, frankly. So in that series, the fact that I had colleagues, I work Serial and This American Life as well, incredibly, incredibly collaborative. We're not doing anything by ourselves. Like we're always working together in groups. And so that to me was crucial, just like completely invaluable to have my colleagues saying like, wait, why are you saying it like this? Or you sound like you're, thinking of it this way, but why aren't you thinking of it that way? And just being checked all the time was hugely helpful. We also have outside fact checkers for all of our stories. So, people who are not, like all they do is fact checking the story. So they're like professionals who we hire to do that work. And they're often catching things of like, why are you using your tone here sounds such and such, or... Oh,
so they even go into that, not just the facts, but they go into the way you interpret that.
Oh yeah, they'll totally check things for tone too. I mean, not correct, and sometimes we won't take the note and we're like, no, I think this is justified. but no, they're often saying, pointing out stuff like that too. Yeah. So I'm not under the delusion that I can be objective in the sort of clinical sense of the term, or that any reporter really can be objective. I don't really sort of believe in that as a goal. I think my goal is to be fair and truthful. So I feel like, being aware of your limitations as like a human being, that
right.
We're not robots and we're all going to have feelings about things and prejudices and just trying to be aware of them is like the best we can do.
Now, you co-own the Serial Productions, right?
I do.
And you also produced, as part of that, it was a spin-off, was Shitdown, that was Brian Reed's. How involved were you in that production?
I really came in, Julie Snyder created that with Brian. They are sort of the co-creators of that. I came in, once they already had drafts, of the episodes, that's when I would hear them and I would work on them in the normal way that we do edits at the show. So, sort of intense listening and feedback sessions and then going into the script and making suggestions and all of that. But Julie's really the co-creator of that. So I was more just an editor on it.
That writing in Shitdown was absolutely stunningly spectacular. It was,
I
was just astounded.
It was beautiful.
It was absolutely beautiful. It was like American Gothic. It was, I've listened to that a couple times just for the narration. It's absolutely beautiful. I think that is, to me, I think that had 10 million downloads when that first released too. The whole family of Serial podcasts are just absolutely riveting to me. And you have a third season coming out.
Our third season is out. It's finished. Yeah, we finished in November.
Oh, that was okay. I missed it. And I've been kicking around going, I need when they're coming out again.
It's really good. You should listen to it.
I get caught up in Slow Burn. That was I revisited the Lewinsky Clinton scandal.
Yeah, I listened to it too. I thought it was great. Yep.
Well, I know you're tight for time, but I have one last riveting, important question, and that is, what's it like to see yourself portrayed on Saturday Night Live?
Oh, weird. Very weird. Very surreal.
And there's like two different sketches, I think. There was the one with you with the finale, and there was the one with Santa Claus.
The finale wasn't Saturday Night Live. That was Funny or Die.
Was that funny?
I actually preferred that one. That one, I just because it felt really true to life, where I was like, how did they know? It's funny. A lot of people think those are me, which I really like, because both those women who played me are very, very pretty. But I remember I was talking to some photographer, like we had to do a shoot for something. I was getting my picture taken for something, and I was on the phone with the photographer, and she was like, I was asking what they wanted me to wear, because I was like, aren't you not supposed to wear like patterns or stripes or something when you're getting, I can't remember. And she was like, oh yeah, no, can you just wear that long sleeve green top that I've seen you in? And I was like, long sleeve green top? I don't think I have. I was like, I have a short sleeve green, and just went around and around. And then finally I realized she was talking about, I think it was like Cecily Strong or whatever. I was like, yeah, that's not me. That's not me.
Cecily's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's the Sarah Palin effect. You know, people started quoting her from Saturday Night Live like she actually said it. But at least you look better.
Yeah.
So Sarah's going to be here on Friday, May 17th at 8 p.m. She's going to be at Maryland Hall. It's a conversation with Sarah Koenig, host and co-creator of Serial. And she's going to be joined by Aaron Henkin of WYPR. And this is presented in partnership with St. Anne's School. And you can buy tickets at ticketing.marylandhall.org. There's still some seats available, but they're going pretty fast. Sarah, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to be there to see it. I'm going to be the fanboy sitting in the front with asking all the questions and having you just pass me over because you're getting irritated.
Great. Thank you so much. No, thank you for being interested. And yeah, come say hi. If we don't call on you from the stage, come say hi after.
All right, Sarah. Well, I really appreciate it. And good luck. And I look forward to seeing you.
Okay. Bye-bye.